Christopher Beckett, an eccentric billionaire tired of his team's flattery, asks the handyman of his mansion, Mr. William Porter, to accompany him to a high-level meeting as his right-hand man. What happened was surprising. Could the simple ideas of a handyman transform one of the biggest corporations in the world? Discover this mystery by watching until the end. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Christopher sat in his opulent office, a lavish space adorned with priceless art and furnishings that spoke of his eccentricity and extraordinary wealth. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on the mahogany desk cluttered with luxury gadgets and documents. He drummed his fingers impatiently against the polished surface, an expression of frustration etched across his chiseled features. Around him, a cadre of executives sat with their backs straight and eyes glued to him like moths to a flame, each clad in tailored suits that screamed ambition. They were focused, nodding vigorously as Christopher spoke, but he could sense their insincerity. Their words dripped with flattery, making him feel like a jester in a court of sycophants rather than a serious leader steering a vast empire. Are we really serious about innovation? Christopher's voice cut through the air, sharp and demanding. Or are we merely satisfied with the status quo? I need your insights, your real insights, not your rehearsed compliments. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging furtive glances. One of them, a slick-haired man named Richard, cleared his throat, ready to pounce on the opportunity to placate their boss. Of course, Christopher. We're all dedicated to pushing the boundaries. Perhaps we could look into some new marketing strategies? Christopher leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a skeptical tilt of his head. Marketing strategies? He echoed. That's the best you can come up with? Our company is on the verge of something revolutionary, and you're suggesting we tweak our advertising? I want ideas that make waves. Maybe we could explore collaborations with emerging tech companies? Chimed in Claire, an ambitious woman with a sharp wit that often made her a favorite among the board. That could enhance our product offerings and— No, Christopher interrupted, his voice rising. I don't want more of the same old song and dance. I want fresh perspectives. I want ideas that come from real-world experience, not just theoretical concepts plucked from business journals. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. The executives shifted uneasily, their previous enthusiasm wilting under the weight of Christopher's expectations. He glanced around the room, watching as their faces morphed from eager compliance to blank masks of confusion and insecurity. Is there anyone here willing to tell me something that isn't just a rehearsed line? He challenged, his eyes narrowing. What's the point of having a team if I can't rely on you to bring me genuine insights? Finally, Richard spoke up, his voice a mere whisper. Perhaps we could, reconsider our approach to the customer engagement? Christopher's frustration hit a breaking point. The man had barely registered as having contributed anything of value. He pushed his chair back, the sound of wood scraping against tile echoing in the silence. This meeting is pointless, he announced, rising to his feet. I'm done. If you can't offer me the innovative thinking I need, I'll find someone who can. With that, he stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The sound reverberated through the hallway, leaving the executives in stunned silence. They exchanged nervous glances, knowing that Christopher's mood swings were legendary, but this time felt different, more intense. As he navigated the grandiose corridors of his mansion, Christopher's mind raced with thoughts of frustration and disappointment. He needed someone who understood the real world, someone grounded. In his search for inspiration, his mind drifted to Mr. William, the handyman who had been working in his home for years. The man was a true jack of all trades, fixing everything from leaky faucets to broken chandeliers with an uncanny ability that always impressed Christopher. As he turned a corner, he spotted Mr. William up on a ladder, diligently fixing the grand chandelier in the foyer. The handyman's brow was furrowed in concentration, a hint of frustration visible as he adjusted the delicate crystals. Christopher paused for a moment, watching him work. There was something refreshing about Mr. Williams' straightforwardness, a stark contrast to the polished facade of his corporate team. "Hey, Mr. William," Christopher called, his voice cutting through the stillness of the foyer. Mr. William turned, a tool in hand, his face lighting up with a warm smile. "Hello, Mr. Christopher. Is everything all right?" Christopher sighed, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Not really. Just had another pointless meeting with the executives. They're all talk and no substance. I need someone who can think outside the box, someone who understands what real people want." Mr. William climbed down from the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know, sometimes the best ideas come from the simplest solutions. People in the corporate world can get so caught up in their own jargon that they forget what really matters." "Exactly," Christopher exclaimed, a spark igniting within him. "You get it. I need fresh ideas, not the same old corporate spiel. It's frustrating. Have you thought about looking at things from a different angle?" Mr. Williams suggested, leaning against the ladder. "Sometimes, the best solutions are right in front of us, but we're too busy looking for something complicated." Christopher studied Mr. Williams' earnest expression. There was a sincerity in his words that he hadn't found in his executives. The handyman had a way of seeing the world that was untainted by corporate politics. "You know what? I think you might be onto something," Christopher said, a grin breaking through his frustration. "Really?" Mr. William raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in Christopher's demeanor. Christopher's mind raced with possibilities. "How would you feel about joining me for the next business meeting? I could use your perspective, someone who isn't entrenched in corporate nonsense." Mr. Williams' face fell momentarily, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "But sir, I'm just a handyman. I don't know anything about business." "Exactly," Christopher countered, excitement bubbling within him. "That's exactly why I want you there. You think differently. You understand what regular people want and need. It's time to shake things up around here." Mr. William hesitated, glancing around the extravagant foyer and then back at Christopher. "Are you sure? I don't want to embarrass you," he said, his tone laced with genuine concern. "Trust me, you won't. I'm tired of the same old faces and the same old ideas. I need someone who can offer a fresh perspective, and that's you," Christopher insisted, his excitement palpable. "Let's show them what real ideas look like." With a deep breath, Mr. William nodded slowly. "All right, if you really think it could help, I'll do it." Christopher's grin widened as he clapped a hand on Mr. Williams' shoulder. "Perfect. This is going to be a game changer. I can feel it." As he walked away, Christopher felt a rush of anticipation. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps change was on the horizon. He had taken a leap into the unknown, and with Mr. William by his side, there was a sense of authenticity that he hadn't felt in years. Little did he know, this decision would send shockwaves through his empire, changing the course of their lives forever. The day of the meeting dawned with an air of anticipation that was palpable in the lavish boardroom. It was a grand space, adorned with polished mahogany tables, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and walls lined with contemporary art that screamed opulence. Executives in tailored suits, their faces a mix of skepticism and bewilderment, filled the room. Christopher, the flamboyant billionaire, stood at the head of the table, his presence dominating the atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming with an unusual mix of excitement and defiance. "Today, we're going to shake things up. I've brought in a new advisor who will help us navigate some challenging waters." The murmurs started almost immediately. Whispers of confusion and disbelief floated through the room. Who could possibly advise them better than the seasoned executives who had dedicated their lives to climbing the corporate ladder? Their eyes darted towards the door, expecting a well-dressed professional, perhaps someone with an MBA from a prestigious university. Instead, when Mr. William, the humble handyman, stepped in, the room fell into a stunned silence. Clad in his usual work attire, worn jeans and a simple button-up shirt, he looked like a fish out of water in such opulent surroundings. Christopher, with a flourish of his hand, gestured towards Mr. William. "This is Mr. William, my new right-hand man. He's not just a handyman. He's a man of practicality and common sense. He sees things from a perspective that none of us have considered." The executives exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to barely suppressed laughter. Claire, a sharp and ambitious executive, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Christopher, are you serious? This is a board meeting, not a community service project. What can he possibly bring to the table?" Mr. William, feeling the weight of their judgment but determined to make an impact, took a deep breath. "I may not have the fancy degrees or years of corporate experience, but I've worked alongside people from all walks of life. I understand what drives ordinary folks, and sometimes that's exactly what a business needs to thrive." The air grew thick with tension as the executives regarded him with a mixture of condescension and curiosity. They were used to discussing strategies in abstract terms, wrapped in jargon and buzzwords. Mr. Williams spoke plainly, cutting through the pretentiousness with clarity. "If we're going to tackle the issues facing this company, we need to start by understanding our customers. They're the ones who keep us afloat, after all." Christopher nodded vigorously, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Exactly, William. Let's hear your thoughts." With a wave of his hand, he encouraged Mr. William to take the lead. The handyman shifted in his seat, organizing his thoughts amidst the scrutinizing gazes. "Well, for starters," he began, "I've noticed that our product line has become too complicated. We've added features that customers don't even want. Sometimes, less is more. Simplifying our offerings could attract a wider audience." A few heads nodded, but Claire's expression hardened. "That's just naive thinking. You have to consider the market trends and the competition. Simplifying won't give us an edge. Innovation will." "Is it innovation?" Mr. William countered. "If it doesn't resonate with the people we're trying to serve? What good is a cutting-edge feature if it leaves our customers confused? We need to listen to them, not just throw more tech at them." His straightforwardness took the room by surprise. The executives were accustomed to the elaborate presentations filled with graphs and statistics. Mr. Williams' approach was refreshingly different, an honest dialogue rather than a sales pitch. As he continued, laying out practical strategies that emphasized customer engagement and feedback, Christopher observed the reactions around the table. Faces that were once skeptical began to soften, and whispers of agreement started to ripple through the room. "I can't believe I'm saying this," one executive finally spoke up, "but I think he has a point. We've been so focused on outdoing our competitors that we've forgotten who we're really serving." Another added, "Perhaps it's time we step back and reassess our priorities. We've been too caught up in our own bubble." The discussion evolved rapidly, with executives debating the merits of Mr. Williams' suggestions. Heated exchanges emerged, revealing the undercurrents of tension that had been simmering for months. Christopher watched in awe as the conversation shifted from dismissive skepticism to genuine inquiry. "I've seen it firsthand," Mr. William continued, his eyes brightening with passion. "People want authenticity. They want to feel connected to the brands they choose. If we can create a narrative that resonates with them, we won't just sell products. We'll build a community." Claire was visibly agitated, her brow furrowing deeper. "But how do you propose we do that without losing our competitive edge? This isn't just about being nice. It's about profits." "Profits come from real connections," Mr. William replied calmly. "If our customers believe in us and trust us, they'll come back again and again. It's about creating value, not just chasing numbers." At that moment, Christopher felt a shift in the room. The executives, previously united in their skepticism, were now divided. Some were leaning in, intrigued by Mr. Williams' ideas, while others, especially Claire, appeared increasingly defensive. The air crackled with energy, a mixture of excitement and tension that had not been felt in the boardroom for years. "Let's take a vote," Christopher suggested, his voice firm. "Who here thinks we should explore Mr. Williams' ideas further?" Slowly, hands began to rise, some hesitantly, others with enthusiasm. The dynamics of the room were shifting, and Christopher could sense the tide turning. The executives were beginning to question their established strategies, their carefully crafted plans now under scrutiny. As the meeting progressed, Mr. Williams' confidence grew. He shared anecdotes from his experiences, illustrating how simple changes had made a significant difference in the lives of everyday people. His honesty and authenticity resonated deeply, and the atmosphere grew increasingly collaborative. The once formidable barrier between the executives and their humble advisor had begun to dissolve, replaced by an unexpected camaraderie. By the end of the meeting, Mr. William had not only presented practical solutions, but had also ignited a spark of innovation that left the executives buzzing with ideas. As they filed out of the boardroom, Christopher caught Mr. William's eye, and a smile broke across his face. "You did it, William. You really did it." Mr. William chuckled, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "I didn't think they'd listen. I just spoke from the heart." "Exactly," Christopher exclaimed, the excitement radiating from him. "That's what they needed. A voice without the fluff. You might have just changed everything." But as they exited, Christopher sensed that the battle was far from over. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and he could almost feel the executives plotting their next move. But for now, they had taken a step towards authenticity, and together, they would navigate the unpredictable waters ahead. Back at Christopher's extravagant mansion, the atmosphere was a mixture of celebration and tension. The lavish decor, with its gilded accents and expensive art pieces, stood in stark contrast to the brewing discontent among the executives. Christopher and Mr. Williams sat at a grand table, surrounded by an extravagant spread of gourmet food and fine wines. Yet the success they had just achieved felt bittersweet. "Can you believe it?" Christopher exclaimed, raising his glass in a toast. "We actually turned their heads today. You were incredible, Mr. William." His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, a childlike delight lighting up his features as he watched Mr. William's modest demeanor. Mr. William, dressed in his usual work attire, a simple button-up shirt and jeans, looked down at his plate, still slightly overwhelmed by the day's events. "Thank you, Mr. Christopher. I just spoke what I thought was right." "I didn't expect such a reaction," he replied, his voice steady yet humble. Christopher leaned back, a smirk curling on his lips. "Well, they didn't see it coming. You should have seen their faces. Priceless." He chuckled, but the joy didn't fully mask his awareness of the undercurrents swirling in the corporate world surrounding them. Yet, unbeknownst to them, in the opulent conference room they had just left, whispers had begun to circulate among the executives. Claire, a sharp and ambitious vice president, was particularly irked by the day's events. Her perfectly coiffed hair bobbed slightly as she turned to her peers, her voice low but filled with venom. "This is ridiculous. He's just a handyman. What does he know about running a company?" An older executive, Mr. Thompson, adjusted his glasses and replied, "But he had some valid points today. We can't ignore that." Claire shot him a pointed look. "Valid? Or just simplistic? We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not a community project." Her tone dripped with disdain. "Christopher is losing his touch, and this man is only going to pull him further away from reality." As the executives exchanged worried glances, Claire continued, "We need to remind Christopher of what this company stands for. We can't allow a handyman to dictate our future." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Mr. Williams sensed the weight of the moment. "Mr. Christopher, do you think they'll really accept my ideas? I mean, I'm just a handyman, after all," he said, his brow furrowing in concern. "Don't let them get to you, Mr. William," Christopher said earnestly, his eyes sharp and serious. "You have something they don't, real-world experience. They're stuck in their corporate bubble, blinded by their own ambition. You see things clearly." Mr. William nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered in his mind. "I just don't want to overstep. I'm not here to take anyone's position. I just want to help." "Help?" Christopher scoffed with a smile. "You've done more to help today than any of those executives have in years. They're just afraid of what you represent. Authenticity and change." As the night wore on, the atmosphere at the mansion was filled with laughter and banter. However, the executives, led by Claire, were plotting their next move. "We need to undermine him," Claire suggested, her eyes gleaming with determination. "If we can plant a seed of doubt in Christopher's mind, we can regain control." The following day, the board meeting loomed over Christopher like a storm cloud. As the executives gathered in the luxurious boardroom, the tension was palpable. The air was thick with unspoken animosity, and Christopher felt the weight of their stares on him as he entered with Mr. William by his side. "Good morning, everyone," Christopher said, his voice cheerful yet slightly strained. "Today, we'll continue discussing the proposals Mr. William brought forth last week." Claire wasted no time. "Christopher, can we talk about the qualifications of your new advisor?" she interjected, her tone sharp and accusatory. "What exactly are his credentials? Shouldn't we be concerned about placing such important decisions in the hands of someone without a formal background in business?" Mr. Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands clasped tightly together. Christopher, however, stood firm. "Mr. William has a perspective that none of us have. He understands the practical side of our business, something we've been missing." "Understanding the practical side doesn't mean he knows how to run a company," Claire shot back, her voice rising slightly. "We're talking about navigating a complex corporate landscape. It requires experience, not just common sense." "Experience?" Christopher echoed, his brow furrowing. "How has that worked out for us, Claire? Our profits have stagnated, and we're stuck in the same old routines. Mr. Williams' ideas are fresh and innovative." The tension escalated as other executives began to murmur, caught in the crossfire. Claire leaned forward, a predatory glint in her eyes. "And what about loyalty, Christopher? How can we trust someone whose background is less than glamorous? What if he has ulterior motives?" The words hung heavy in the air, and Christopher's heart sank. "Ulterior motives? Mr. William is here to help us succeed. He has no agenda other than improving this company. Or does he?" Claire challenged, her voice smooth like silk but laced with venom. "What if he's here to undermine you, to take your position? It wouldn't be the first time a corporate outsider has tried to do that." Christopher's face flushed with anger. "You're crossing a line, Claire. You don't know him like I do. He's proven himself more than any of you have this past week. But has he, really?" she pressed, her gaze intense. "We need to consider the repercussions of elevating someone who doesn't belong in this room." The room fell silent, the air thick with doubt and tension. Christopher's mind raced as he glanced at Mr. William, whose face had turned pale. He could see the unease etched on his friend's features, and it gnawed at his resolve. "Enough," Christopher said abruptly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. William has earned his place here. I won't have you question his integrity or motives." As the meeting progressed, Claire's planted doubts began to sow seeds of uncertainty in the minds of the other executives. The skepticism was palpable, and Christopher felt the weight of their judgment. The walls felt like they were closing in, and he could sense the shift in their loyalties, the doubt creeping into their conversations. "Mr. Christopher, I appreciate your support," Mr. William finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "But I don't want to be the reason for any conflict. I'm just trying to help." Christopher shook his head firmly. "You are not the problem, Mr. William. The problem lies with those who can't accept change. Don't let them intimidate you." Yet, as they left the meeting, Christopher couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in the pit of his stomach. Claire's words echoed in his mind, and he could sense the executives' growing discontent. The foundation of their partnership was beginning to tremble, and he could only hope that the bond they had forged would withstand the storm brewing in the corporate world around them. Mr. Williams stood in the vast expanse of Christopher's opulent office, the lavish decor contrasting sharply with his own humble demeanor. The weight of the corporate world's whispers had begun to seep into his consciousness, creating a lingering tension that clung to him like an unwanted shadow. He fiddled with the cuff of his shirt, a simple white fabric that felt out of place against the backdrop of gold and leather. "Mr. William," Christopher said, his voice a blend of encouragement and concern. He leaned back in his oversized chair, fingers steepled together, gazing intently at his newfound partner. "You're not worried about what they're saying, are you?" William hesitated, biting his lip. "It's hard not to be, sir. The rumors, they're everywhere. I just don't want to cause you any trouble." His voice carried the weight of honesty, the fear of being an outsider in a world he never intended to enter. Christopher's expression softened. "You're not causing trouble. You're bringing fresh ideas, something they've lacked for too long. Remember, the only reason they're upset is that you challenged their status quo." He rose from his chair and walked around the desk, placing a reassuring hand on William's shoulder. "We're in this together. I won't let them push you out." William nodded, but the unease in his chest remained. "I appreciate that, Christopher, but—" "No buts," Christopher interrupted, his voice firm yet gentle. "I believe in what you bring to the table. We'll navigate through this storm, I promise." As the days passed, the atmosphere at the company became increasingly strained. Whispers and glances filled the air whenever Mr. William entered a room. Executives who once seemed indifferent now eyed him with barely concealed animosity. The tension reached a boiling point during a critical presentation that had been scheduled to showcase Mr. Williams' ideas. Christopher had high hopes, but little did he know that the seeds of sabotage had already been sown. The boardroom was lavishly decorated, with a long mahogany table and plush chairs that spoke of old money and tradition. As the executives took their seats, the air was thick with anticipation and a hint of malice. Claire, the most vocal critic of Mr. William, sat at the far end, a smirk barely concealed behind her polished facade. Christopher, oblivious to her intentions, welcomed everyone with a charismatic flourish. "Thank you all for gathering today. We have an exciting presentation from Mr. William, who has been instrumental in developing our new strategies," he said, gesturing for William to begin. William stood up, his heart racing. He had prepared meticulously, his notes neatly organized. But as he opened his mouth to speak, Claire jumped in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Before we dive into Mr. Williams' ideas, I think it's important to emphasize the risks involved. After all, we're talking about the future of this company." Christopher shot her a warning glance, but Claire pressed on. "It's easy to suggest changes when you have no skin in the game. But what does a handyman really know about running a multi-billion-dollar empire? Shouldn't we stick to proven strategies?" The room fell silent, the tension palpable. William's confidence wavered, but he squared his shoulders and addressed the executives directly. "I've worked in practical settings all my life. I understand the challenges we face on the ground level. My ideas are rooted in reality, not just theory." Claire's lips curled into a disdainful smile. "Ah, but can you really compare fixing a leaky pipe to, say, navigating international markets? That's quite a leap." "Actually," William replied, his voice steady despite the rising tide of doubt in his stomach, "the principles are the same. Whether you're fixing a pipe or strategizing for a merger, you need to assess the situation, identify the issues, and find practical solutions." "Practical solutions," Claire mocked. "Like what? Just throwing out ideas without considering the repercussions." The atmosphere shifted. The executives leaned in, eager to witness a clash. William felt the heat of their scrutiny, the weight of their expectations crushing him. He took a deep breath, determined to rise above the fray. "For instance, I believe we can cut unnecessary overhead costs by streamlining our supply chain. Simple adjustments can lead to significant savings." "Interesting concept," Claire interjected, feigning interest while her eyes glinted with malice. "But without a detailed analysis, it's just a wishful thought, isn't it?" With that, she launched into a misrepresentation of his ideas, twisting his words and undermining his credibility. "Imagine if we just went ahead and implemented these changes without proper oversight. We could end up losing millions." The executives murmured among themselves, doubt creeping into their minds. Christopher felt his chest tighten as he watched the scene unfold. He rose again, trying to regain control. "I believe Mr. Williams' insights are invaluable. We need to consider all perspectives before making decisions." But Claire wasn't finished. "Or we could just admit that we've strayed too far from our core competencies. After all, the board has built this company on proven strategies, not on the whims of a handyman." The room buzzed with tension, and Christopher's heart sank. He could see the executives shifting, their allegiances fracturing. The air crackled with uncertainty, and he knew that the moment was slipping away. The board's confidence in Mr. William was waning, and the sabotage was working. After the disastrous presentation, the boardroom emptied, leaving Christopher and Mr. William alone. The silence was suffocating, thick with unspoken words. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "I'm sorry, William. I didn't see that coming. William's shoulders sagged, the deflation evident in his posture. I should have anticipated that. I'm just a handyman. I didn't belong there in the first place. His voice cracked, a mix of disappointment and self-doubt. Don't say that, Christopher replied, his voice firm. You belong here more than they do. You have the ideas that can save this company. We just need to figure out how to present them without their interference. William looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. But what if they never accept me? What if they always see me as an outsider? Christopher stepped closer, his expression earnest. Then we'll change their minds. Together. But as he spoke, he felt the weight of the board's expectations crushing him. He knew that the executives were growing restless, and his loyalty to William was now under scrutiny. Days turned into a whirlwind of meetings, as the board grew increasingly impatient with Christopher's defense of Mr. William. The whispers grew louder, and doubts began to creep into the minds of the executives. One evening, Christopher found himself alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline, contemplating the impossible choice that lay ahead. Could he really let Mr. William go to appease the board? The thought made his stomach churn. William had shown him a world beyond the gilded cage of corporate politics, a world grounded in authenticity and practicality. But the pressure was mounting, and he could feel the noose tightening around his neck. As he paced the room, he weighed his options. Loyalty to his friend against the demands of a cutthroat executive team. He could already hear the murmurs, the questions that would arise if he stood firm. Would he be seen as a fool? As someone who valued the opinions of a handyman over seasoned executives? The dilemma clawed at him, leaving him restless. With every passing moment, he felt the chasm between his ideals and the reality of the corporate world widening. He had to make a decision, one that could change the course of their lives forever. Christopher sank into his chair, his mind racing. He knew he had to confront the board, to defend Mr. William and the vision they had for the company. But could he muster the courage to do it without jeopardizing everything he had built? The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking. Christopher sat in his lavish car as it glided through the quiet suburban streets, the opulence of his life contrasting starkly with the modest homes that lined the road. He had always been a man of extremes, an eccentric billionaire who relished the extravagant lifestyle that wealth afforded him. But today, he felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on his chest. The confrontation with Claire and the board had left him reeling. He was torn between loyalty to Mr. William, the handyman who had become an unlikely ally, and the pressures of the corporate world that surrounded him like a suffocating fog. Arriving at Mr. William's small, unassuming home, Christopher felt a wave of unease wash over him. The exterior was simple, with peeling paint and a well-tended garden that reflected Mr. William's dedication to his work, even in his personal life. He stepped out of the car and approached the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. Would Mr. William understand the precariousness of their situation? Would he resent Christopher for bringing him into a world so different from his own? After a moment of hesitation, Christopher knocked on the door. It swung open to reveal Mr. William, his face lighting up with a warm smile that immediately put Christopher at ease. "Mr. Christopher, what brings you here?" Mr. William's voice was filled with genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the cold professionalism Christopher had endured all day. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, Mr. William," Christopher began, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "I needed to talk to you about, well, everything. Come in, come in." Mr. William stepped aside, gesturing for Christopher to enter. The interior was cozy, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. Christopher took a seat at the small kitchen table, feeling out of place in the modest surroundings. As Mr. William busied himself with pouring 2 mugs of coffee, Christopher took a moment to gather his thoughts. "I wanted to let you know that things have gotten complicated at the office. Claire is pushing hard against your position, and the board is... They're not happy with my decision to bring you on board." Mr. Williams' expression turned serious. "I can imagine. It's not every day a handyman gets invited to the big leagues. But I thought you believed in what we were trying to accomplish." "I do," Christopher replied, his voice firm. "But there's a lot of pressure on me to make this work. and I worry that if things don't turn around soon, I might have to let you go." Mr. Williams' brow furrowed slightly, the hurt evident in his eyes. "I appreciate your honesty, Christopher, but you have to follow your instincts. You know what we talked about. Authenticity matters. If you believe in my ideas, don't let them push you around." Christopher felt a surge of admiration for Mr. Williams' unwavering confidence. "You're right. I just hate the thought of losing you. You've brought a fresh perspective that this company desperately needs." They exchanged meaningful glances, the weight of the moment palpable in the air. "If it comes to that, I understand," Mr. Williams said quietly, his voice steady. "But don't forget why you chose me in the first place." Christopher nodded, feeling a swell of determination rise within him. "You're right. I can't let them dictate my choices. I need to stand firm, not just for you, but for the vision I believe in." With that renewed sense of purpose, Christopher stood up, determination etched on his face. "I'm going to call a company-wide meeting. It's time to confront these issues head-on, and I want you by my side." The following day, the boardroom was filled with an air of tension. The executives shuffled in, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Christopher stood at the head of the table, flanked by Mr. William, who radiated an aura of calm confidence despite the storm brewing around them. "Thank you all for coming," Christopher began, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "I called this meeting to address the recent events and clarify our direction moving forward." Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression skeptical. "And what direction is that? The one that involves listening to a handyman?" Christopher took a deep breath, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with the executives. "Mr. William has valuable insights that we cannot afford to overlook. His ideas are practical and grounded in reality, something we've been lacking." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the room as executives exchanged glances. Claire's smirk deepened, and she leaned forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, we're meant to take advice from someone who doesn't even understand the complexities of our industry?" "Actually," Mr. William interjected, his tone calm yet assertive, "I understand the complexities of running a business better than you think. Sometimes, it takes an outsider to see what's right in front of you." Christopher felt a surge of pride at Mr. Williams' confidence. "Exactly. We need fresh perspectives, and I believe that embracing change is essential for our survival. If we continue down the same path, we risk stagnation." Claire scoffed, her tone dismissive. "And how do you propose we change? By implementing some whimsical ideas from a handyman?" Before Christopher could respond, he felt a sense of urgency rise within him. He had gathered evidence of Claire's manipulative tactics, the rumors she had spread about Mr. William, and her attempts to sabotage their progress. It was time to expose her deceit. "Actually, Claire, I have something to share," Christopher said, his voice steady. "I've been reviewing the recent reports and communications, and I've come across some concerning evidence." The room fell silent as he pulled out a folder filled with documents, laying them out on the table for everyone to see. "These emails indicate that you've been undermining Mr. Williams' contributions, spreading false narratives about his intentions. Your actions have been detrimental to our progress." Claire's face turned pale, her confidence wavering as the executives began to shift in their seats, glancing at each other in disbelief. "I never," she started, but Christopher cut her off. "Your actions have consequences, Claire. It's time for accountability. We cannot allow personal agendas to derail the company's future." The tension in the room thickened as the executives processed the implications. Doubts were beginning to surface about Claire's leadership, and Christopher could feel the tide turning in their favor. "Let's focus on what matters. The ideas that can propel us forward," Mr. Williams said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We need to foster an environment of collaboration and trust, not sabotage." As Christopher looked around the room, he could see the executives' expressions shifting from skepticism to contemplation. They were beginning to realize that the true threat to their success lay within their ranks, not with Mr. William. With the momentum shifting, Christopher felt a surge of hope. "I stand by my decision to bring Mr. William on board. Together, we will steer this company towards authenticity and success." and I expect each of you to contribute positively to that vision." The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Claire's composure shattered, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The board members began to whisper among themselves, their loyalty shifting as they recognized the sincerity in Christopher's voice and the validity of Mr. Williams' ideas. Christopher had taken a bold step, not just for Mr. William, but for the future of the company. The battle lines had been drawn, and he was ready to fight for what he believed in. The room buzzed with a newfound energy as the executives began to rally around the idea that perhaps change was not only necessary but inevitable. As the tension in the boardroom escalated, Christopher felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The air was thick with anticipation and skepticism, swirling around him like a tempest. He glanced at Mr. William, who stood beside him, calm and collected despite the storm brewing in the room. Christopher cleared his throat, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "We're here to address the recent challenges our company has faced. But first, I'd like to invite Mr. William to share some insights he's been working on." A chorus of murmurs erupted as the executives exchanged incredulous glances. Claire, seated at the head of the long, polished conference table, arched an eyebrow, her expression a mix of disbelief and derision. "Mr. William? The handyman? Are we really going to entertain this?" she scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. Ignoring Claire's challenge, Christopher nodded at Mr. William, encouraging him to step forward. "Please, share your thoughts. They're important." With a deep breath, Mr. William took center stage. He adjusted his glasses, his hands slightly trembling, but his eyes sparkled with determination. "Thank you, Christopher, and thank you all for this opportunity." He paused, surveying the room filled with the polished faces of corporate elites. "I believe we've been looking at our problems from the wrong angle." As he laid out his analysis, the boardroom fell into a hush. Mr. Williams spoke about the company's recent failures, outlining how the decisions made by the executives had led to the current state of affairs. "The downturn in our sales isn't just about market conditions. It's about how we've chosen to adapt, or not adapt, to the changing landscape. We've been too focused on short-term gains instead of sustainable practices." Christopher watched as the expressions of the executives shifted from skepticism to intrigue. Mr. Williams' straightforwardness was striking a chord, and he continued to delve deeper into his analysis. "For instance, our investments in marketing strategies that don't align with consumer values have backfired. People want authenticity and sustainability, not just flashy advertisements." Claire's face flushed as she listened, her jaw tightening. "You can't possibly expect us to take advice from someone who doesn't have a background in corporate strategy," she shot back, her voice dripping with condescension. "Actually," Mr. William replied, maintaining eye contact, "my background may be different, but that allows me to see things from a fresh perspective. Sometimes, it takes someone outside of the bubble to identify the rot within." Gasps filled the room, a mix of admiration and shock at Mr. Williams' audacity. Christopher couldn't help but smile at the way Mr. William held his ground. The tension that had been suffocating the atmosphere began to dissipate, replaced by a newfound curiosity. "Let's be honest," Mr. William continued, "the recent failures stemmed from decisions made in this very room. Decisions that prioritize profit over principle." He glanced at Claire, who was visibly fuming. "We can't keep pointing fingers at market conditions without taking responsibility for our choices." As Mr. William wrapped up his presentation, the board members sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Claire shifted uneasily in her seat, her confidence waning under the scrutiny of her peers. "Mr. William, while your insights are refreshing," another executive, Tom, interjected cautiously, "how do you propose we move forward from here? What tangible steps do you suggest?" Mr. Williams smiled, a glimmer of hope lighting up his features. "First, we need to engage directly with our customers, understand their needs and values. Second, let's invest in sustainable practices that align with consumer expectations. This isn't just about saving the company. It's about aligning ourselves with a future that people want to be part of." Christopher felt a surge of pride as he watched Mr. William command the room. The executives were no longer dismissing him. They were leaning in, taking notes, and asking questions. The dynamic had shifted dramatically, and for the first time, Christopher sensed that change was not only possible but imminent. "I propose a strategy session where we can brainstorm practical applications of these ideas," Mr. Williams suggested, his voice steady. "Let's involve not just the executive team but also employees from different levels of the company. They have valuable insights that can help us redefine our approach." Claire's facade of confidence finally cracked. "This is absurd," she exclaimed, slamming her palm on the table. "You can't seriously believe we should take advice from someone who's been mopping floors until last month." With a steely gaze, Christopher leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Actually, Claire, that's exactly what I believe. Mr. William represents a perspective we've neglected for too long. If we are to move forward, we must embrace diversity of thought, not fear it." The room buzzed with energy as Christopher's words resonated with others. Executives who had once sat in silence began exchanging ideas, their faces animated with the possibility of change. Even Claire appeared momentarily taken aback, her confidence shaken by the growing support for Mr. Williams' vision. As the meeting drew to a close, Christopher excused himself and Mr. William, leaving the board members to discuss the next steps. Outside the boardroom, the hallway felt charged with potential. "Did you see that?" Christopher exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "You turned the tide, Mr. William. They're starting to listen." Mr. William chuckled, still processing the whirlwind of the meeting. "I didn't expect them to be so receptive. I just spoke what I believe to be true." "Your honesty is your greatest asset," Christopher said, clapping Mr. William on the back. "And it's exactly what this company needs. You've earned a place at this table." As they walked through the ornate halls of the corporate headquarters, Christopher felt a renewed sense of purpose. The echoes of the boardroom discussions lingered in the air, a promise of change on the horizon. Days later, the news of Mr. Williams' rise to prominence within the company spread like wildfire. The executives were forced to confront their own incompetence, and Claire found herself isolated, her manipulations exposed. The board was shaken to its core, and a new leadership team began to form, one that embraced authenticity and collaboration. In the aftermath, Christopher publicly announced Mr. Williams' promotion to a permanent advisory position. "We're embarking on a new era," he declared during a company-wide meeting. "An era where every voice matters, where innovation is born from diverse perspectives." The applause was thunderous, and Christopher felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. Mr. Williams stood beside him, a humble smile on his face, embodying the spirit of change they had both fought for. As they walked out of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric with optimism. Employees greeted Mr. William with newfound respect, recognizing that his ideas were not just practical but revolutionary. "Are you ready for this, Mr. William?" Christopher asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "More than ready," Mr. William replied confidently. "Let's show them what real change looks like." Together, they stepped into the hallway, symbolizing a partnership that would redefine the company's future. One built on authenticity, collaboration, and a shared vision for a brighter tomorrow.